Breaking tonight, 7 people, including 4 suspected Hamas members, arrested in Europe today, suspected of planning terror attacks. The arrests came in Denmark, and Germany, and the Netherlands. The 7 suspected of planning attacks on Jewish institutions in Europe. Now, this comes after warnings here at home, potentially fomented by anti-Israel protests that have closed down streets, and there's been anti-Semitic harassment. After all, this is what FBI Director Christopher Wray has been talking about. He's said this. Keep in mind, this was even before today's multiple arrests.
I've never seen a time where all the threats, or so many of the threats, are all elevated, all at exactly the same time. That's what makes this environment that we're in now so fraught. I see blinking lights everywhere I turn.
3 suspects currently being detained in Berlin, another in the Netherlands, are all long-standing members of Hamas. According to Germany's justice minister, this planned attack is only the latest example. Releasing a statement, it says in part, attacks on Jews and Jewish institutions have increased in our country in recent weeks. We must therefore do everything we can to ensure that Jews in our country do not have to fear for their safety again. Denmark's prime minister made the immediate connection of the attempted terror attacks to what's happening in Gaza. Quote, it is, of course, in relation to Israel and Gaza, completely unacceptable for someone to bring a conflict elsewhere in the world. And of course, that is the concern here, that terrorism will once again find its way to American soil. And that is something for which Director Wray did not mince words on either.
Given the steady drumbeat of calls for attacks by foreign terrorist organizations since October 7th, we're working around the clock to identify and disrupt potential attacks by those inspired by Hamas's horrific terrorist attacks in Israel.
Joining us again is our own Cohen, an Israeli special ops veteran and a counterterrorism and security analyst. Thanks very much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. Do you think that these arrests in 3 different countries in Europe are likely linked? They haven't linked them officially yet, but I would assume that's certainly a possibility.
Well, here's where I'm at with that, Dan. So terrorism is a little bit different in law enforcement. And even though I come from the counterterrorism world in Israel, the special operations world, I serve in law enforcement here, have been for the last 15 years. I serve as a lieutenant for a sheriff's department where I train patrol and SWAT and active shooter response. So unlike law enforcement, where things tend to move a little bit slower, investigations have to be a little more slow and methodic in order to peel the can open to really connect the dots. You got to slow things down. With terrorism, you have to flip it, and you have to assume that those are connected. And the reason why is because of the speed at which terrorism operates. We saw where October 7th came out of. It was out of nowhere. We've seen the thousands of rockets coming over from Israel continuously, even though Israel's putting this sir lachatz in Hebrew, that pressure cooker campaign on Hamas, and now they're moved to the south. But when it comes to national security, U.S. law enforcement, as it relates to the Hamas terrorists that they've just picked up, you want to assume that all of those threads are connected and then start working backwards from there. And the reason why is because you have to get in front of terrorism. It's not crime. It's not traditional investigations. So you have to assume they're connected, start peeling that open, and then wherever there's threads that you can connect immediately, you have to get more surveillance, eyes and ears, communications, human intelligence gathering, cell phone listening, eavesdropping. And that brings me back to the Intelligence Foreign Surveillance Act, which is about to expire, Section 702. They're about to pull the plug on that thing. They're going to try and put all kinds of little rules on that. And Dan, you can't have it.
I agree.
You got to have it. Israel, we don't have those restrictions. We need to hear. We need to listen. I mean, we invented Pegasus. It's incredible. It allows us to track phones. We need that. The U.S. needs that surveillance capability.
Let me ask you about Prime Minister Netanyahu made this comment. He said, we commend our partners in the security and law enforcement agencies in Denmark for their successful counter-terrorist operation, which culminated today in the arrests and an exposing expansion of Hamas infrastructures to Europe. How involved do you think the Israelis are when it comes to arrests of Hamas members, for example, in Europe?
Dan, I'm going to be careful just for safeguard reasons here, but I can tell you this. Israel's Mossad, or the Misrad Latafkidim Meuchadim in Hebrew, or the Institute for Intelligence Special Operations, is a very active intelligence organization. It has to be. It's the eyes and ears of Israel. It's the beacon in the vanguard. Israel relies on that intelligence, and I'm not going to talk about the failure on October 7th. Israel will start cutting heads off for that one in due time. Right now, it's time to protect Israel's border and eliminate Hamas. However, I'm going to say this: Hamas, Mossad works very, very closely, particularly with the European intelligence partners, and the reason why, and this is going to be tough for some viewers to swallow, is because Europe has been very lax with their immigration over the last 25 years. There has been an influx of Muslims who have immigrated to Europe. Germany, 5-6 million. France, 5-6 million. London. And the question then becomes, what population of that Muslim immigrant pool could be potentially loyal or have interests in siding with groups like Hamas, with groups like ISIS? You want to be careful, because Muslims aren't bad people, but there's extreme versions of Islam. So the eyes of the Mossad and the tentacles of the Mossad are very deep in Europe, and they have been for many years. And the reason why is because we saw what happened at the Bataclan. We saw what happened at the London Bridge bombing. We saw what happened in Barcelona. It's a real thing. And the Jewish communities are just as vulnerable as any other soft target. In fact, they're even softer. There's synagogues everywhere. And that leads me to my next point. The well is wide open for those attacks to start happening here in the U.S. And Dan, regardless of my stance on gun laws, I don't get political. I never do. I'm trying to bring people to the middle when it comes to national security and counterterror. But the fact is Americans love their guns. Anybody can go pick up a weapon. They can open fire. So my contention is that as this